Continuing our reading in Hellbent for Election by Phyllis Speshock, Chapter 26. We proceeded north along the highway and then cut off to the west on a gravel road. A flock of starlings flew overhead, dipping low to freckle the earth with their shadows. The sun was very warm now, making Alexis so bright when it shone upon him that I could hardly bear to look directly toward him. I looked instead at my little black shadow and wondered at it. Finally, I said, "Alexis, on the first afternoon we met, you said, 'What you are evolves out of what you were.' Though I argued at the time that I would not overlook believers' behavior on those grounds, I do admit I suffered for my parents' sins. Still, you intimated that Vicey would not suffer for mine." "She will suffer for yours, Hellbent, as long as she is on earth. He can dilute that suffering, however, as you have seen. I spoke primarily of eternal suffering. She will not be judged by him for what you have committed, unless, of course, she should choose to use your sins as a basis and excuse for her own, that is, to wallow in self-pity and thereby go astray." "Did I do that, Alexis? Is that what you're saying?" He sent me a glance, not a full look, just a glance, bright and blinding. "I heard you confess to him that you thought only of yourself, Hellbent." Suddenly disgust poured through me. "Honestly, Alexis," I said impatiently, "at this late date, do you still have to turn everything I say into a verbal spanking?" "But Hellbent, you asked me." "Well, I shouldn't have. Let's talk about something else." We went several yards to silence then. Finally, Alexis said, "Hellbent, you seem to become more touchy as the minutes pass by. Also more resentful toward me, being the reasonable presence you are. Do you not think that since you refuse to excuse others' believers' behavior on the grounds that their upbringing helped to make them what they are, you should likewise in all honesty refuse to excuse your own? You maintain that the doctrine of Christianity is, in itself, an education which necessarily causes the believer to change and expand. So then no one, once he believes and accepts, has a right to lean upon his past as if it were a magnet holding him back from improvement." I didn't lean upon my past in that way," I said crossly. "I was willing to forgive and forget, but everywhere I went I saw only duplicates of my parents' relatives or more advanced cases. Besides, I have told you it's too late to go on hashing it over now. You said it was up to me, and I have told you my choice. It's over and done with, and now I am only biding my time until you release me. Now that you know the full story of my life, you must have felt my arguments justified, or you would not have agreed to let me go." "Hellbent," he said, "you do not seem to understand even now. I do not let you go. I am only—" I know, a ministering spirit. Can we talk about something else, Alexis? Where are we going anyway?" "You wanted to see your grave, I believe." "Oh. We're on our way to the cemetery?" "Yes." "But I also want to see Della and Nan. Will there be time for that too?" "Yes, Hellbent, plenty of time." And then I laughed. "Of course, I forgot that I will at least spend eternity with them, won't I?" He refrained from answering, and I supposed that it did not set too well with him to lose a case, although he said that my outcome would in no way impinge upon his happiness. I went on watching my shadow for a time, and then I said, "How can I be that small? I feel bigger than that." "That is because you are inside yourself, Hellbent, that you feel big. If you came outside, you would see how small you are." "But I was bigger than that on Earth." "Of course. You were filled with him." "You mean I emptied him out, sort of?" "Yes, bit by bit you are doing that." "And I began to cast a shadow when his light left me? But then, why do believers cast shadows on Earth while they live here?" "Because they still have a fleshly nature and are still subject to temptation within their spiritual nature." "But when I shed my earthly body and I went above, I was rid of all that." All but a scrap of diabolical temptation, Hellbent. Your wish to spend eternity in hell. And when that won out, but he had become silent again, and I was content to leave it that way. Still, being no more substantial than a flea was a curious state in which to find oneself. But by this time we had reached the cemetery, and I turned my mind to the expanse of green velvet grass, marked neatly off by marble headstones. "Do you have a family plot?" Alexis asked. "No," said I. There was so much scraping and disagreement that each little branch purchased its own plot as far away from the others as possible. Some went to cemeteries in other towns. We had no occasion to buy any. "Well then," he said, "we shall look until we come to it." "But what if it has no marker as yet?" "We will know," he said, "one way or another." The cemetery covered a small hill. Beside the main gate, a road turned in at the edge and wound around, coming out at the opposite side to form a nearly complete circle. We started at the main gate and walked slowly to the rise, looking left and right for newly sodded graves. There were none. When we came to the peak, I turned to Alexis to say, perhaps she chose some other, and then I saw Nan's car parked at the front of the hill on the back road. In the far left corner, he and Della worked at clearing away the remains of some cut flowers and painstakingly planted geraniums. Della seemed to be dabbing at her eyes now and again, and Nan would pause to pat her shoulder and speak to her. "Alexis!" I cried happily. "They're here!" I left him and hurried down the hill to the corner of the cemetery, but as usual, he was right beside me when I got there. "Della!" I cried, gyrating up and down until my little black shadow looked like a tiny bouncing ball. "It's me! It's Wilful! Don't cry, Della! I'm all right, see? I'm just a box full of spare parts there on the ground. I'm here! I'm here! I'm going to hell! We can all go to hell together!" "Blinding blizzards, Hellbent!" Alexis interrupted. "If you never cease clamoring, you shall not be able to hear what she has to say." I settled down then, and took notice of the fact that she was talking or trying to, though Nan had to keep patting her and saying, Now, dear." "If only," Della wept, "he could have understood through his delirium. If only he had not done this, we might all have gone on the same." "It's all right," Nan said, drawing her head against his shoulder. "It will be all right. It's done now. We can't undo it. Don't cry, dear." "If he had died instantly, if I'd never known." "It couldn't be helped, dear. It happened the way it happened, and we must simply accept that." "But if there were only something we could do for him." "There isn't. No more now, dear. Vicey will be home soon for lunch. Come away and let us think of her. She must be told. Perhaps it will help. Come now." But she still stood there, her hands wrung together, her face pale, staring at my grave through a blur of tears. "In a way," Nan offered then, "his condemnation was our salvation. Think of it like that it was all for a purpose." But she only wept louder. "Oh no, not like that. For if I had hammered away a bit longer at him, and if he had argued a bit more heatedly against my stubbornness, why then—" "No, Della, it would never have happened that way. Don't torture yourself. When you told him you wouldn't change, I'm sure you really meant it." "But I didn't think I did. Something inside me, some little splinter of faith from my childhood when we were still innocent to adult behavior, kept pricking at the inside of me." I began to be very perplexed. "Alexis," I said, "what is she talking about? I thought at first she was only grieving for me, but it sounds—" "Suspicious," whispered Alexis. "Then listen some more." I turned my attention to Della in time to hear Nan say, "You cannot go on like this, Della. You must think of Vicey. For her sake, you must not dwell on Wilful. You must remember what the guidebook says. All things work together for good. There is no other way. Leave it in his hands. Come now." I gasped aloud. Non-regenerate? I cried. Quoting the guidebook? I don't believe it. But then Della was saying, it all happened so quickly. When they called from the hospital, a sudden thrust went through me like a sword. I found myself thinking, I must tell him I am weakening to his way. Then when we arrived and I learned how bad he was, and when they told me the things that he had been raving. Now, dear, please don't get all worked up again. It's quite over and done with. But she went on as if she had not even heard him. Then I knew for sure. Then I had to tell him. When I realized what a hideous thing it was to want hell so much, when I realized what a hideous thing he was for wanting it so much, for seizing the desire for it in his own two hands, the two hands on that steering wheel. Her voice rose in hysteria, and he drew her down against him. I tell you, Della, you will have a breakdown if you go on like this. It isn't worth it. You have your own life to live. You have to live for Vicey's sake now. She needs you more than ever. There is so much to do, dear. Think about where we'll start. Shall we change my name first of all? It will be quite simple, really. Just one letter, from non to now. How do you like that, Mrs. Now Regenerate? Fine, she muffled against his shoulder. If only Wilful could know. If only I had been able to reason with him before he died, get him to confess. But he did confess, dear, over and over for hours. But to everybody but him. Don't you see, Non? I mean now, he needed to confess to him. But he already belonged to him, Della. You know how sick we got of hearing about it. I can't believe one violent act. No, it's more than that. He wanted the belief out of his life so badly that I think he worked at wrenching it loose like an infected limb. I have heard of those who willed themselves to the devil. But there is nothing we can do, dear. It is all done. Please accept it. Try to think of it as I have told you. His downfall was our resurrection. There is no other way. He tried to lead her away, but she moaned. I threatened him. I said we would spend eternity apart unless he changed. And now, it will all still happen. He will be in hell and we will be up there. I can't bear it. What have I done? If only there had been some way of communicating with him at the last. If only we were all still together and could use our time to a better end. It would be the same, he said. Humans are very foolish that way. We would all be the same, and you would be threatening him in the opposite separation. I cannot be undone. It cannot be undone, Della. Come away now. I insist you come away. He placed his arm firmly about her shoulders and moved her toward the car. Still she kept glancing back at my grave, her face contorted with misery. I stood there aghast, staring after them. I can't believe it, I whispered. They have become believers, both of them? My death was such an outrage that it horrified them into believing? How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. I turned upon Alexis angrily then. You knew it, Alexis. You knew it all along. Yes, Hellbent. Why didn't you tell me then? It would not have been ethical. You do not accept his way because of another human. Another human may help or hinder you, but ultimately you must accept or reject solely because of him. That's nonsense. I rejected him because of her, didn't I? And besides, if it is true that I must accept or reject solely because of him, why then, you could say that I did not really reject him at all. For if I've never had any bones to pick with him in his way, have I? Except that I should cause me to dwell with badly behaved believers. Of which, Alexis said with amusement, you are surely not one. Resentment sharpened my voice to a keen edge. It really makes no difference, Alexis. I know Della very well. This will give way, gnaw away in the inside of her until she will probably go out and do the same thing I did. Don't worry. When she gets to thinking of eternity with all our parents' relatives. You thought you knew her very well, he said quietly. But even if you were right, she would never reach that point of doing what you did. He has already taken care of that. and suddenly we were directly in front of Della as now regenerate helped her over a rough spot and down to the car. Alexis passed his hand before my line of vision, and when he took it away, I saw Della as though she were naked and had transparent skin, like a chart in a doctor's office. Her heart beat and her blood flowed, and there in her abdomen I saw a growth. I had no sooner seen it than my sight once again became normal for a presence such as I, and she was again clad and making her way into the automobile. I turned to Alexis and said in all haste, "What was that? I know very little about human anatomy except what I had to research for various articles, but that looked..." He nodded his head slowly. A tumor, Alexis?" Again he nodded. "But surely not." "Yes, Hellbent. Malignant." "Malignant?" I croaked. "Surely you can't mean my beautiful Della is dying?" "No," he said gently. "I only mean she is getting ready to leave this mortal shell and come at once, free and unfettered, into eternal joy." "You make it sound so easy," I said, "as if one would not writhe with torment." "But of course the extraction is sometimes painful. The thing is, pain is bearable, and death is most bearable of all. Just when you think you can stand it no longer, suddenly there is no more to stand, and immediately you have crossed over. There you are, with all eternity before you, and sublime happiness growing greater with each step you take closer to Him. That is our real aim and goal, you know." "It sounds good," I said bitterly, "but you left out the part about the High Registrar and the Chief Counselor and the individual counselors and rigid Pharisee, Mrs. Snob, Mrs. Insecure. And besides, Della will balk when she gets there." "Possibly, unless someone could be there to meet her, someone she loved and trusted. But then, it is too late for all that, isn't it? You have made your choice. Come along." He started away, and I saw too that Della, and now regenerate, had driven off. I was compelled to follow at Alexis' side. "What of Vicey and now regenerate?" I asked. "What will become of them after Della?" "They will be fine," he said cheerfully. "You saw Regenerate's belief bringing peace and acceptance to his face. You heard the reassurance in his voice. He has always wanted a family, you said. He will do everything to make Vicey happy and secure in every way. You need not give any of them another thought, Hellbent. And please stop lagging. We have one more stop, the last one." "The last one?" "Yes, Hellbent, the last one." Suddenly, remorse spilled over inside of me at the thought of all I had lost. "I'm like Samson," I cried. "In my death, he used me to accomplish what I would not accomplish in my life. Wretched fool, wretched fool!" "We must hurry, Hellbent," he said. "There's no time for that now." I came along like a galley slave, the thought of hell no longer poignant and provocative, but only bleak and desolate. And that's the end of chapter 26.